brought in 40 different vendor companies. We demonstrated the feasibility. We launched a certification program, and we discovered that just getting the things interoperable, and our model is connected, interoperable, and trusted. Just addressing that didn't really solve the issue. A vendor would say, well, I can share data, but I don't want to share data with this company because I'm afraid, I'm concerned about what they'll do with it. Hospitals say that I want my equipment to be interoperable, but I have this legacy issue. They're all conflicted. So on one hand, they want to interoperate, and the vendors were remarkably supportive. On the other hand, it is a complex ecosystem. What is lacking is really a system for trust. You realize pretty quickly it's not just the technology. It's the clinical use of the technology. It's the underlying contracts. Interoperability happens pretty well in a lot of other industries. I came from an industry that was completely interoperable. The cable, television, and telecommunications, and broadband is the same globally. The technology that drives broadband in your home in the United States is the same as the technology that drives broadband in Europe and Asia and everywhere else, because they were able to agree and align on an approach. And in healthcare, it's been the non-technical barriers that have really been the challenge. And the industry needs to really align on principles of trust that get to the non-technical factors. There are 6,000 hospitals in the country and there are 6,000 different ways of doing things. And the goal is to create some templates and models so that it doesn't have to be invented every time.
Sindhu Pandit actually comes out of Salesforce, so she has some small amount of understanding about software and interoperability and how you build a middleware platform or a standardized platform that you can still provide bespoke solutions on.
I think Ed hits on a lot of really important points. I think we were able to accelerate some of the adoption in this last couple of years because of probably more regulatory and policy changes than anything. To his point, I don't think a lot of the technology is new. I don't think we had a shortage of data before. I don't think it was even the capacity to utilize the tech that was out there. I think it was just breaking down some false barriers that's been put up over the last as we've grown as an ecosystem, and we had to work over them, through them, around them to get the work done. I think having a national strategy is a really important place to start.
You're also talking to the most skeptical audience in the world, right? Physicians, payers, health systems. No, the skepticism comes from the training. Most of them are scientists and doctors, and that is actually how you are trained, to question everything and to ask for the data. Show me the data needs to be a really key mantra of digital health. So when I speak to health systems and payers about digital health, nobody disagrees that healthcare needs a digital transformation. The problem is how we do that. And the problem that they tell me is there is so much digital health being thrown at employers, health systems, and payers. There's almost saturation. And there is no place that any of us can go to figure out what is good and evidence-based in digital health.
Employers are now dealing with up to 16-point solutions to manage health and wellness for their employees. I can't even imagine the point solution overload that these employees are facing. So even if you're having an ailment that could benefit from one of the solutions, just that exchange is hard. And then, of course, if you expand it to what's happening in the larger ecosystem, as a provider who treats a very vulnerable patient population, I don't know how to help sift through what's available and then, matrix that with what's paid for. And then, do they have access to that with regards to whatever internet access they do or don't have? How do we go about creating an environment where we can start to create that evidence-based insights, if you will?
So firstly, digital health companies, the best ones, have clinicians at the table in the product development, and they bring them in early and they engage them often throughout the process.
Where our health systems tell us what problems they're facing, and then we, source and recruit startups that we think can have both a real impact on care, but also, since they're earlier stage, we have to place a bet on which startups will actually be feasible for our health system partners to work with. things, I mean, I have a public health background, so things that I personally always look for on the team are solutions that are rooted in, again, a real problem and evidence-based wise. So I really resonated, I think, and I don't want to mispronounce their name, but Adi put in the chat that as a founder, his experiences that inventors prefer unregulated products with faster go-to-market. It's sort of a catch-22 with our early stage companies because they often don't have the pilot partners yet, or enough pilot partners or a sample size, large enough to fully prove efficacy of product. A lot of reasons too that providers are or people that are in these decision-making positions, there is a lot of just barriers to the change management side of things, or what will this look like if I introduce this to a department? I know that, burnout is a huge issue right now. So I think there's this also hesitancy of having to deal with training and further cleaning procedures and further introducing new things when people are kind of trying to stay afloat. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges I've seen right now in our digital health space is like these solutions are actually have the power and the ability to democratize care and reduce a lot of burdens, but based on still the fragmented ways systems are set up and the absolute like burnout and retention issues folks are dealing with, it's a really challenging time to like introduce what still feel like novel concepts, even if they're kind of table stakes patient experience or provider experience solutions.
In general, physicians don't really have a boss in the way that other people think, right? So we have chairmen, we have people who tell us, here's where you're going to work. Here are our research. Here's what you need to do to keep up with your CME, et cetera, et cetera. But they don't actually tell you how to practice on the day-to-day level. Right? We all have to keep within our standard of care, and we learn our standard of care in our medical education, which has not changed very drastically for decades. And so when you're trying to introduce something new, you do have to show not only the efficacy that you're saying that you have the data, but then also the burnout one that Kate mentioned, that's absolutely true. You just can't do one more thing, but you really have to do a lot to convince physicians that it's going to be safe, add to the quality and standard of care. What has worked and generally does work is one, you do quickly show that it is safe and efficacious and it does improve quality, right? There is some research that backs it up that will change it. I think what we talked about in the pandemic and the panel on the pandemic proves that, right? That will change things quickly if you can prove that. And then two is forcing physicians to do it. When we wanted to roll out our telehealth program within our department, we were just Jefferson, we do telehealth. This is who we are. And so physicians who work there would do it. And that really would be part of how we changed the way they thought about it. I think because of the pandemic, we've seen a lot of this research studies. I will tell you, just even from the beginning of the pandemic to the end, the amount of research studies that looked at a number of digital interventions was incredible how much more there was. And now people are interested in this topic. And the fact that various bodies have now within the medical education bodies have said, hey, telehealth and digital health are going to be big topics. Telehealth specifically has now core competencies that have to be taught in medical schools. That's huge. As far as digital therapeutics and other digital interventions, that will just be the next step.
So there's this weird chicken and egg scenario between the providers and the payers, where the payers don't want to pay for something until they can see the ROI, and physician adoption. And then the physicians don't want to adopt it if it's not going to be paid for and they don't know how to reimburse for it.
One thing for sure is that the COVID pandemic has greatly accelerated the rate of innovation in healthcare. And we've had some of our CEOs, our board is made up of CEOs of hospitals and health systems. And they've said that in 1 month, they've achieved more than they've achieved in years in the past, just out of necessity. And in the conversation, it's interesting here, we talk a lot about trust at the center in the 6 dimensions. So there's always these competing forces that tend to complicate things. And then there's the contractual, what are your legacy contracts, and how's this data going to be shared, and what's going to happen to it. And then finally, sometimes the trump card is the regulatory and the policy implications. You always have to make sure that you're compliant with regulation, and sometimes regulation is the only hammer that seems to be able to break through the other 5 barriers.
So I was interviewing Dr. Shantanu Nandi, and he said to me, medicine moves at the speed of trust. And that stuck with me so deeply, because that sentiment echoes across every single part of healthcare.
I mean, I think we've all kind of seen some of the opportunities that are ahead of us, and a lot of that has to do with data exchange, data aggregation, and data reconciliation. Whatever we end up moving forward with, it has to be a one that everyone sort of comes together on, and trust has to be at the center of it. It's sort of the credit bureau for the new world of healthcare. It's this idea that we're going to be able to have this central repository where we can pull the data together, but we really can create a 360 view of the patient.
What I think needs to be brought out, and it could be a for-profit, a nonprofit. We have to think about that, but a platform brought to the industry with the right governance models so that it can be trusted. Because when a proprietary company tries to solve it and they come out with their platform, which is what happens, it inherently is not trustable. And that just perpetuates the issue. So it's just another way to do it. So I would say the industry needs leadership to come together, and it's going to take some investment. The innovation abounds. The innovation really comes up with the barriers to scaling. In
the last couple of years, we have seen how the rest of this industry really has not kept up with the innovation, how fast it's been going. So this is a time to really get the other partners up into the level of the innovating. Innovating is going to happen regardless. So how do we get everyone else to catch up?
Policy ultimately drives the incentives for change. And if policy isn't making kind of the common sense or the healthier choice, the easy choice, then people are just not going to be able to do it. We've even seen it with vaccines. We've seen it with other things. If certain policy incentives are not at play, then large scale population level change isn't going to happen. So
the healthcare system, everybody keeps saying it's broken. It's not broken. It's actually doing exactly what it was designed to do. We need to rethink how we do healthcare. If I was to say who is the single source, if I had to pick one, even though I believe it's collaborative as well, I would actually say it's the payers. How something gets paid for drives how it gets adopted. And so one of the biggest influences of the payers is actually employers, right? So I think there's an interplay between payers and employers that can really drive change.